The rain struck the windshield like a quiet punishment, each drop a measured reminder of everything that had gone wrong. I sat in the dim belly of the parking garage, the concrete echoing with distant engines, staring at my phone glowing with 23 missed calls. 2 days earlier, Charles had looked me straight in the eye and, with that calm, managerial detachment he wore like armor, told me I wasn't ready for promotion. Now the entire staff of Summit Logistics seemed to be calling as if the building were collapsing under its own secrets. My name is Kevin. 49 years lived, some of them scarred, most of them spent believing I understood the trajectory of my life. Strange how quickly that illusion can fracture. I'd been at Summit for 8 years. Before that, 12 years in the Navy, orchestrating logistics across oceans where a single miscalculation could cost more than money. When you're responsible for delivering supplies to ships isolated in the middle of nowhere, you learn that order is not optional. Precision becomes a creed. Backup plans become quiet prayers. That discipline followed me into corporate life, maybe too faithfully. When I arrived at Summit, operations looked like the aftermath of a silent mutiny. My predecessor had vanished without a trace. No documentation, no instructions, not even a mislabeled folder. It felt like stepping into a house where someone had deliberately cut every wire, leaving darkness humming in the walls. I spent 6 months resurrecting the place. Nights bled into mornings, weekends dissolved into the glow of spreadsheets and flowcharts. I rebuilt every process, every system, every forgotten protocol. My son, Edward, was 7 then, 5 fragile years after Nicole died from cancer. And I still remember the quiet tremor in his voice when he asked why his father was always somewhere else. I told myself sacrifice was temporary. They say hard work eventually earns its reward. They lie, but I didn't know that yet. For 8 years, I kept Summit from falling apart. When our biggest client, Titan Manufacturing, demanded urgent turnarounds, I stayed. When systems buckled, I held them together. When processes snapped in half, I stitched them back. I wrote training manuals, carved order out of chaos, became the living memory of a department that would have collapsed without me. Then Charles arrived 3 years ago, 40-something, fond of wide visions and lofty strategies. A pleasant man on the surface, but uninterested in the actual machinery that kept his empire from grinding to a halt. Why would he bother learning? I had made everything too seamless. He floated. I carried the weight. What I didn't see then was the quiet betrayal assembling itself behind closed doors. Charles had plans. His son, Kevin, fresh from a prestigious MBA program, 26 and polished, was stepping into operations. A boy who had never soothed an enraged client at 2 in the morning, never rebuilt a collapsed system, never tasted responsibility sharp enough to cut. The promotion meeting happened on a Tuesday, a day now etched into me like a reopened wound. I presented my metrics, efficiency up 35%, errors down 60, Titan Manufacturing bringing $8 million annually through a relationship I had cultivated with years of careful work. Charles skimmed the portfolio for a few indifferent seconds before setting it aside with a sigh that felt rehearsed. "I appreciate what you've done, Kevin," he murmured, eyes drifting past me. "But the department needs new energy. Kevin will come aboard next month as Senior Operations Manager." Senior Operations Manager. The position I had bled for. "I see," I said, my voice steady though something inside me twisted. "And me?" "You'll stay where you are," he replied mildly. "Kevin will need someone seasoned to guide him. Help him find his footing. A mentor to the man taking my future. A shadow doing the labor while the heir collected the title." I kept my face still, old Navy training resurfacing like a ghost, while something colder, darker stirred beneath my ribs. "I understand," I said. "Good," he replied, already half turned toward his next meeting. "He starts Monday. Maybe put together some orientation materials over the weekend." And that was the moment something inside me shifted. 8 years of weekends stolen from Edward, 8 years of midnight repairs, of unspoken grief, of devotion squandered on a company that saw me as a convenient tool. They wanted me to spend my weekend training the boy they'd chosen to replace me. The calls on my phone kept flashing. I didn't move. Somewhere deep in the garage, a door slammed, sharp, metallic, a sound that felt like a verdict. Unfinished business has its own gravity, and I had just realized mine. I rose, shook Charles's hand, steady grip, steady mask, and walked out of his office without a word. But instead of drifting back to my desk like some obedient ghost, I headed straight for the parking garage. The air smelled of oil and cold concrete, and somewhere between the stairwell and my car, a decision settled inside me with the clarity of a blade sliding into place. I wouldn't quit, wouldn't erupt, wouldn't hand them the spectacle they expected. No, retribution is quieter when it's methodical. I would simply obey, precisely surgically to the letter, my job description. A document they'd never read, a document that, ironically, would undo them. My official duties were a handful of sterile sentences: manage daily operations within assigned scope, coordinate with other departments when necessary, maintain client relationships within procedural limits. A hollow frame that didn't begin to describe the machinery I kept alive every day. In reality, I arrived before sunrise, crafting briefing notes for Charles's meetings. I answered emails from 3 departments because no one else could untangle the mess. I handled systems before they unraveled into crises. I stayed late to prevent explosions no one else ever saw. But the paper said 9 to 5. And for the first time in 8 years, I intended to honor exactly that. I drove home that Tuesday evening and did something that felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. At 5:30 p.m., I turned off my work phone. Not silenced, off. Edward stared when I walked in at 6 sharp instead of the usual stumbling in long after dark. "Dad, you're home?" "I finally realized my time might be worth more than I've been told," I said, feeling something loosen in my chest. "Want to throw a baseball around before dinner?" His face lit up with a kind of hope I hadn't seen in years. In that moment, it felt like the first act of my own quiet justice. The next morning, I arrived at 9 a.m. exactly. No briefing notes waiting on Charles's desk. No preemptive triage of the day's inevitable disasters. I answered only the messages addressed to me and forwarded everything else along like a dutiful cog. When calls arrived about processes far beyond my assigned scope, I directed people, politely, impeccably, to the proper department heads. By noon, the tremors had begun. Pamela from accounting appeared at my desk, brows pulled tight. "Kevin, did you see the email about the Titan manufacturing shipment conflict?" "I did," I said, continuing my quarterly report. "So, can you fix it like always?" "That's a logistics coordination matter," I replied, calm, nearly pleasant. "I forwarded it to shipping and procurement. They'll resolve it together." Her confusion flickered like a dying bulb. "But you always handle those cross-department issues." "I've been encouraged to focus on my core responsibilities," I said, letting a small smile cut through the air. "Efficiency, you know." The look she gave me, bewildered, uneasy, was the purest confirmation of how deeply I'd been exploited. No one understood where my responsibilities ended because I had never allowed anything to break. Until now. By Thursday, the cracks were widening into chasms. The Titan conflict had escalated. Shipping and procurement were circling the issue like panicked animals, unable to reproduce the workaround I usually solved in 10 minutes. 3 other clients had requests rotting in departmental purgatory because no one remembered the escalation hierarchy. Something I'd written in painstaking detail in the operations manual no one had read. I watched the chaos unfold with the serene curiosity of a man studying combustion behind safety glass. Every delayed email, every misrouted call, every request bouncing helplessly between departments was a testament to their negligence and my absence. Around mid-afternoon, Pamela from procurement appeared, hair disheveled, face tight with strain. "Kevin, the Arden industrial purchase order is stuck in approval limbo. Can you do your thing?" "What's the issue?" I asked, as if the answer didn't already echo somewhere in my memory. "The system won't accept their new billing address, and no one knows how to override it." I nodded slowly. "That procedure is in Section 7 of the Operations Manual," I said. "The override requires supervisor approval from both procurement and accounting." "But that'll take hours. Calls, emails, signatures." "It's designed that way," I said softly. "Security measure. Prevents billing fraud." His expression shifted. Panic, disbelief, dawning understanding. A man seeing for the first time the invisible scaffolding he had relied on for years. The wheels of their collapse had begun to turn, and all I had done was follow the rules. Pretty important protection for the company, I added, letting the implication hang. Pamela stared at me as if seeing a stranger wearing my face. But you always handle this stuff in 5 minutes. I had special authorization under previous leadership, I said evenly. But with the department restructuring, I let the word sting. It seems wiser to follow protocol. He walked off shaking his head, muttering under his breath, no doubt wondering when I had become such a rigid disciple of the rules. If only he knew how meticulously vengeance can hide inside obedience. That evening I was home by 5:15. Edward sat at the kitchen table, hunched over his math workbook, pencil tapping in quiet frustration. When he looked up and saw me, there was a flicker of disbelief. "Dad, can you help me with this equation?" For the first time in months, my mind wasn't buzzing with operational alarms or the dull ache of impending burnout. I sat beside him, guiding him through formulas and fractions, and somewhere between variables and parentheses, I realized how many small, vital moments I had traded for the illusion of corporate loyalty. "You seem different this week," he said when we finished. "Different how?" "Less gone," he murmured. "Like you're actually here when you're here." Sharp kid. He recognized the shift before I fully did. The quiet liberation that comes when a long open wound begins to heal. Not from forgiveness, but from the resolve to act. Friday delivered the reckoning. When I arrived at 9, the office was a pressure chamber. Charles paced outside the conference room, jaw tight. Kevin sat stiffly at the table, already overwhelmed. And Edward, our regional director, had been summoned, never a good sign. 2 unfamiliar suits from corporate headquarters hovered nearby like carrion birds sensing opportunity. The receptionist intercepted me mid-stride. "Kevin, they need you in Conference B, immediately." I stepped inside to find faces etched with strain. Whatever had happened, it had detonated fast. "Kevin," Edward said, exhaling in relief. "Thank God you're here. We've got a serious problem with Titan manufacturing." "What's the issue?" Charles launched into an explanation, stumbling through jargon he barely understood. Titan had called for an emergency 10 a.m. meeting. Their implementation was failing, the entire Q4 rollout hanging by a thread. Kevin scribbled notes furiously but kept asking questions so elementary they barely qualified as operational. "Their contract is at risk," one corporate executive said bluntly. "If we don't fix this today, they walk." I reviewed the scattered printouts on the table. Beneath the frantic handwriting and contradictory explanations, the problem revealed itself. Straightforward, predictable, assuming you understood how the systems interlocked and had read the documentation I'd written. "This is a known issue with their custom configuration," I said. "The resolution is in the Implementation Guide, Section 12. It requires coordinated changes across 3 systems, in a very specific order." Kevin flipped pages with the desperation of a drowning man grasping for air. "Which section?" "12. Subsection 4.7 through 4.12. If you follow the steps, the fix takes about 3 hours." Edward leaned forward. "Can you take this on immediately?" I checked my watch. "I have the quarterly compliance review at 11. Federal regulators expect it today. Missing the deadline triggers automatic penalties and potential license suspension." Charles snapped too quickly. "The review can wait. Titan is more critical." I met his gaze calmly. "Titan is critical, but losing our license affects every client, including Titan. Priorities must align with consequences." Silence. Heavy, calculating. You could feel the executives reassessing the landscape, sensing the fragility of a department built on one man's unacknowledged labor. "What are our options?" Edward asked quietly. "Well," I said, turning slightly toward Kevin, "he can handle the Titan issue. The guide is detailed. Step-by-step instructions. This would be excellent practical experience." Kevin's face drained of color. I don't think I'm ready for something like this." "With respect," I said, tone supportive but unyielding. "This is exactly the kind of responsibility tied to your new role." Charles's complexion darkened, frustration rising like heat through concrete. Kevin, he said, voice tightening, we need you to fix this, personally. His demand hung in the room like a challenge, one sharpened by panic, entitlement, and the unavoidable realization of just how deeply they depended on the man they had chosen to betray. I can take the lead on Titan, I said, my voice steady but edged with intention. If you want the compliance review postponed. But before we gamble with that, we need to acknowledge exactly what the regulators will do if we miss the deadline. Edward lifted his hand, signaling me to pause. Let's not rush. What would it realistically take for you to handle both? I ran the numbers silently, old instincts attempting to reawaken, though now tempered by a new, colder clarity. The compliance review is divided into 2-hour sessions. I could address the critical parts of Titan's failure and the gaps between them, but the full fix won't be done until after 5. That edges dangerously close to Titan's cutoff, one of the corporate visitors said. It does, I replied. In the past, I would have stayed as long as necessary. Midnight, 2 a.m., whatever it took. But my priorities are shifting. My son has a baseball game this evening, and I've already missed 2 this month. The room fell into a silence so thick it felt accusatory. Edward finally exhaled. Kevin, let's speak plainly. What do you need in order to handle this with your usual thoroughness? I looked at each of them. People who had benefited from my invisible labor for nearly a decade without ever taking the time to understand it. Now they wanted the old version of me, the man who fixed everything, silently, endlessly. Well, I said slowly, maybe we should define what my responsibilities truly are. Charles bristled. Your responsibility is to solve operational problems. My written job description, I countered, states that I manage daily operations within a limited scope. Titan's implementation belongs to project management. That department reports elsewhere. One of the executives leaned in, brow tight. Are you refusing to assist? No, I said calmly. I'm saying the only sustainable way forward is to clarify authority. Kevin becomes Senior Operations Manager on Monday. This crisis is an ideal opportunity for him to learn how our systems function. Kevin swallowed hard. Kevin, I'm grateful, really, but I'm not prepared for something this massive. I turned toward him, letting my expression soften. You have a degree from Brenton University. You're smart. The only thing separating us is exposure. Every expert started terrified. But what if I ruin everything? Then we repair it, I said. That's how competence is built. The documentation walks you through every step. I'll be nearby, between compliance sessions, to answer questions. Charles's composure snapped like a frayed wire. We don't have hours to waste on training. We actually do, I said quietly. Titan hasn't collapsed because of timing. It collapsed because procedures weren't followed. A few more hours won't worsen anything that hasn't already deteriorated. Edward's eyes narrowed, studying me as though seeing my internal shift for the first time. Kevin, something is clearly different with you this week. You're right, I said. I've been thinking about my career, about what I'll leave behind. And, he asked, and I realized I've been propping up a failing structure. Every time I stepped outside my defined role to fix something, I prevented this organization from learning how to stand on its own. Only the hum of the ventilation system broke the silence that followed. So let me pose a question, I continued. What happens when I retire? Or get hit by a bus? Or accept that offer from Baxter Dynamics? The corporate executive stiffened. What offer? Director of Operations, I said. 35% raise, full remote. They reached out last month. I haven't replied yet, out of loyalty to Summit. That much was true, though the meaning of loyalty had shifted dramatically this week. Edward exchanged a pointed glance with the corporate executive. Charles looked pale, hollowed out. Let's continue this privately, Edward said at last. Kevin, begin reviewing the Titan materials. Kevin will guide you, the rest of us, my office. As the others filtered out, Kevin and I walked toward my desk. His steps were uncertain, guilt pulling at him like a tide. Kevin, he said quietly, I need you to know I never asked my father to put me in that role. It's not about what you asked for, I told him quietly, or what you think you deserve. It's about what protects the company and what protects you. Kevin frowned. What are you implying? If your father had pushed you into a leadership role before you were prepared, you would have been set up to fail. Not because you lack intelligence, but because you haven't built the foundation yet. A collapse like that follows a person for years. Confidence, reputation, everything. He absorbed that slowly, the weight settling across his shoulders. I hadn't considered it from that angle. People misunderstand leadership, I continued. It's not about grabbing the title first and scrambling to justify it later. It's about earning the capability before the responsibility arrives. If you're truly serious about operations, you need to understand these systems down to the wiring. For the next hour, we worked through the Titan documentation. To his credit, Kevin was sharper than I expected. Curious, attentive, asking pointed questions. With time and the right guidance, he could become competent. Maybe even good. Around noon, Edward approached my desk. Kevin, may I have a word? We headed to his office. Inside, the corporate executive from earlier waited, posture stiff, expression unreadable. Charles was conspicuously absent. Please have a seat, Edward said. We want to be transparent. I sat. We've mishandled this department, he began. In what way exactly, I asked. The corporate executive stepped in. We've allowed the entire operational structure to depend on your expertise without proper acknowledgement or compensation, and we permitted personal ties to distort objective decision-making. I said nothing, giving them space to continue. Kevin, Edward said, we'd like to offer you the role of Director of Operations. You'd report directly to me. 35% salary increase, authority to rebuild the department as you see fit, and hiring power for 2 senior positions of your choosing. It was a strong offer, more grounded than the fantasies I'd indulged in earlier, but meaningful and overdue. What happens to Kevin? I asked. He'll begin as an operations associate, Edward said. He'll advance based solely on performance, no shortcuts. And Charles? Edward shifted in his chair. He'll be reassigned to strategic planning. All operational divisions will move under your leadership. A sideways demotion. Not revenge, but a quiet reckoning. I'll need time to think, I said. Of course, Edward replied. But I'll need an answer by Monday morning. And regardless of your decision, we'd appreciate your help stabilizing Titan today. I nodded once. I'll take care of Titan this afternoon. Kevin can shadow me and document the process. Walking back to my desk, I let the offer turn over in my mind. Recognition, authority, proper compensation, all finally placed on the table. But the real shift was deeper. They were, at long last, admitting the value I'd been providing in silence for 8 years. Now the question was whether I wanted to rebuild a broken system, or leave it behind entirely. That afternoon, Kevin and I worked through the Titan crisis step by step. I showed him not only how to fix the failure, but why each action mattered. The logic behind the sequence, the invisible dependencies no one else seemed to notice. He recorded everything, his notes dense and meticulous. This is incredibly intricate, he said, when we ran the final validations. I had no idea operations involved all this. 8 years of trial and error, I said, and a lot of nights reading system documentation everyone else avoided. My dad always made it sound like simple coordination. He wasn't wrong, I replied. It is coordination, but only if you understand every piece and every consequence when they fall out of alignment. We finished the Titan fixes by 4:30. The system stabilized. Kevin had a blueprint for how to tackle similar issues. As I packed up at exactly 5 my phone lit with a text from Edward. Dad, game starts at 6:30. Are you really coming? And for the first time in years, I knew the answer would be yes. I stared at Edward's message for longer than I meant to. For 8 years, the honest answer would have been a half-hearted, I'll try, followed by another night swallowed by work. But tonight felt different. Cleaner, sharper, like a wound finally beginning to close. Wouldn't miss it, I wrote back. Edward's game was everything I'd forgotten I needed. He pitched 4 focused innings, his shoulders tight with concentration, and I watched him strike out the cleanup hitter with the curveball we'd practiced in the backyard. I'd missed so many of these small victories. After the game, we grabbed ice cream and sat outside under the fading light, talking about school, summer plans, the harmless dramas of middle school friendships. "Dad," he said suddenly, "are you going to keep coming to my games?" "That's the plan," I told him. "I've been working too hard. I don't intend to miss anymore." He grinned. "Good, because Patrick's dad never misses his games and I was getting kind of jealous." That landed deeper than I expected. My son had been watching other fathers show up while his own father sat in conference rooms arguing over quarterly projections. Over the weekend, I wrestled with Edward's offer. It checked every box I'd been chasing for years: respect, authority, the power to build a department that wouldn't trap anyone the way I'd been trapped. But Baxter Industries offered a clean slate, free of old perceptions and invisible ceilings. By Sunday night, the choice crystallized. On Monday, I arrived at 8:30, a middle ground between the man I had been and the man I was becoming, and headed straight to Edward's office. "I'm accepting the offer," I told him, "with 2 conditions." He nodded, ready. "First, I want full freedom to hire and develop internal talent. Too many capable people get stuck because no one invests in them." "Done." "Second, I want a company-wide cross-training program. No critical knowledge should ever sit in one person's head again." "Agreed," he said. "Anything else?" "One more thing. If Kevin truly wants this career, he should have the chance to earn it. But he must earn it, with competence, not shortcuts." Edward smiled. "I think you'll find he's more dedicated than any of us assumed." The transition took about 6 weeks. I rebuilt the department from the ground up. Roles clearly defined, responsibilities distributed, no more silent dumping of every urgent task onto whichever person was the most capable. I hired 2 exceptional senior staff members who brought fresh ideas, while I provided the institutional grounding to tie everything together. And Kevin surprised everyone. He put in the hours, not out of obligation, but genuine hunger to understand the machinery beneath operations. Within 3 months, he handled routine client problems on his own and showed early signs of real leadership potential. Charles was the unexpected twist. Once he wasn't trying to manage systems he never understood, he flourished. His big-picture instincts finally had space to breathe. Paired with the stronger foundation we were building, his strategic planning helped land 2 major contracts. 6 months later, my life was unrecognizable. I worked at a sustainable pace, left the office by 6:30, and made it to every one of Edward's remaining games. My team ran independently. Clients were satisfied, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was doing the job I'd always been capable of, without sacrificing my life to prove it. One evening, while Edward and I worked through his homework, he glanced up. "So, you're like actually important at work now?" "I was always important," I said with a small smile. "It just took them a while to realize it." "Is that why you worked so much before? To prove it?" Smart kid. "Yeah," I admitted. "I think part of me wanted to be seen. But I learned something. People who matter will recognize your value without you destroying yourself to show it. And people who don't? Sometimes you have to step back and let them discover the gap you leave behind." As he scribbled through his math problems with the same steady persistence I'd always admired, I understood something quietly powerful. The best response to being underestimated isn't rage or retribution. It's making your worth so unmistakable that no one can overlook it again. The director title came with authority, respect, and the power to build something better. But the real victory was simpler, quieter. They finally saw me. And I was home in time for dinner, every night. If you've ever felt invisible at work despite carrying the weight of the place, remember this: your value doesn't vanish because someone fails to notice it. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stop carrying the burden of their blindness and start living a life that makes your worth undeniable.